So we start out with a prayer. Now, normally I take the peace prayer for the Kena Upanishad. But this time I'm going to take the peace prayer from the Kena Upanishad. Because we are just finishing off today, we'll be finished with the Kena Upanishad. And maybe if there's time to start off on our next Upanishad, which is Kena Upanishad, this will take a long time because it's a long Upanishad. And the strategy has been to deal with the short ones first. And but the Kena Upanishad is extensive, but a very important, very significant Upanishad. Ralph Waldo Emerson rates this so highly and uses it as an inspiration for his poetry. So, Om Sahana Bhavatu, Sahano Punuktu, Sahaviryam Kalavavahai, Tejasvinavaditam Mastoma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together in mutual cooperation, happily. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cover with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So just to review, and I want this to be the reason why we're doing it on Zoom is so that we can make it as interactive as possible. So just to review what happened. Last week, we told a story. More accurately, the Kena Upanishad tells a story. And the Kena Upanishad starts off with an understanding of this: what is the nature of the fundamental nature of things, and it leads us to Brahman. But this is a transcendent Brahman. Mm. Now we are getting a personal Brahman, from impersonal to personal, and it's done through a beautifully illustrated story. Well, just to remind you how the story goes, there was a usual struggle between good and evil. So anyway, so there's the usual contest between what we might say, the favorable forces of goodness and those counter to it. And we have to understand the whole universe is this dichotomy between opposites. Without that, we don't get a universe at all. Everything comes in pairs. There's matter, there's antimatter, there's electrons, there are also positrons, and there are electrical positive forces, electronegative forces. Gravity wants to pull everything in, electrical energy wants to move everything out. That is how we get where we are. So good and evil is a necessary thing. We can't say we should do away with all the evil. Yes, we should, of course, in our own lives, promote goodness and purity and truth. That's the whole of the spiritual endeavor. But we have to also acknowledge that the other side of things is a necessary things. If you don't have light, you won't understand what is darkness. The Devas under the leadership of Indra have a great victory, and they're able to rescue the cosmic waters. It's another way of saying that they're able to take this fundamental aspect of nature that is responsible for everything else, that is intrinsically divine. Bring that back for the welfare of all the whole world, that's fine. But you see, even the devas, the gods, if you want to translate it like that, have tremendous egoism. They're suffering from that. They think that they themselves made the victory. But we all know nothing belongs to us. It belongs to Brahman. What kind of Brahman? Now, this is the personal Brahman. This is Ishvara. This is the Lord of the universe. This is, in short, God. But what is God? The English word of God, as I pointed out previously, comes from the Germanic hud, G-U-D, and that goes back to Sanskrit, hutam, one worthy of offering something to. That is, spontaneously, we feel a sense of adoration, thankfulness, and wonder towards something that we know is responsible for everything. And the Kena Upanishad also highlights this by way of answer to a question: what is the agency? The mind works, the eyes work, the ears work. What is the agency behind it? And beautifully it says, a response suitable for meditation practice. Think of it, the eye of the eye. It's not the eye that is seeing. Something behind it is enabling sight. So if you want a definition of what is God, you can use a number of definitions just to get to grips with some entity that has no perishable parts and that has no evolution in time. How do we get to grips with such an entity? And so the definition is that entity, that non-evolving, imperishable entity that is beyond the scope, beyond the framework of our perceiving apparatus. Essentially, we operate within a framework of a perceiving apparatus, the eyes, the ears, and so on, the mind. How else will we understand the universe around us? So there must be some windows where we can look and catch and relate to our environment. We call this life. So the thing which is behind everything, now we can personalize it, because when that enters into it and enters into space, when you do away with all things spatial, when you do with all things temporal, what is left is called God or Brahman. When you bring it back again, the thing that enters into it and makes it sure it moves and looks as if it's working and occupies space and seems to affect changes in time and seems to have or provide a causal connection with everything. So this we call God as well. This is God as we can relate to it. This is the Lord of everything. And so this Brahman, quite rightly, wants to teach all these various forces that we call deities a lesson. So that's how the story goes. Some spirit occurs, something unusual that the deities are not familiar with. And they want to inquire, what is this thing? And so they send, first of all, fire. You recall. And fire has the capacity to destroy everything, and fire is a very fundamental force. And you can say its variation will be photons and eyes that catch it and all the rest of it, but a subtle entity that we can generally call fire. Radiance. When we explode the atom bomb, something that is seemingly solid, we get radiation. Another way of saying that is fire. So it comes, it has a capacity to destroy everything. And so it's inquiring, what is this entity? And the spirit puts down a straw, something that is easy to burn. Unfortunately, fire, with all its capacity to burn, cannot remove it, can't do anything with it. And goes back to the Indra and the other deities and says, I have no idea. You sent me here to find out what the spirit is. I have no idea. Like that, wind also goes. Eventually, Indra also goes. And then Indra, it's revealed to Indra what it is. But it takes him some time, little sluggishness, because something that is out of our range, we have to get to grips with it. It is not a usual thing. And so this Brahman gets revealed. Uma reveals it. This Uma, the daughter of the Himalayas, representing meditation. And so this whole story is a meditation. We can easily sit down and we can say, with all the things that are in our life and all the actions that we do and all the successes that we feel we are responsible for, and activities, even simple ones, cooking and so on. You cook food, that's the normal way of, but the philosopher can ask a question. Did you really cook the food? Or the electrical current manifested as a stove and heat did it for you? You just mix some ingredients, put it into a pot or an oven. The fireman, you ask him. So you have a great victory here, you put out a great fire successfully. Wonderful. Now, did you do it? Or you simply held a pipe and the water itself did it? Yourself, no matter how much you huff and puff, you can't do it. The water itself is doing it. So let us register every success and every action, every activity, every movement to its proper author. And so it's a meditation. We can start off in a meditative way like that with all our actions, all our successes, and bring it back. What is the source of it? And then we can register it everywhere to one thing. And that is what we call God. That is one worthy of offering to. So the Kena Upanishad finishes off with this. It tells us that this story is something like a meditation. And then from there, it goes on to see how inspiration comes in a flash. And if we're not careful, we'll miss it. And tells us also, finishes off that this knowledge is not from anything external, it comes from inside. And then there's a final question from the student, which seems puzzling. Can you please teach me, he says to the teacher, this secret doctrine, what we call Upanishad? And it's a curious question because it seems to us that it's already been covered, but not exactly. The principle may be covered, but what about the practice? What about really knowing it, understanding it? And there's a whole section about this knowledge. And lest we escape it, we have to find out, how do we know this? What is the process? Well, the process is several, but it boils down to one thing: concentration. That is the capacity to take our attention and progressively steer it to the fundamental reality. And there are many ways we can do it. Scripture is necessary. But concentration is the key, the capacity to take our attention and steer it and hold it there. And once we do that, once we have purified the mind through this concentration, what we call yoga, once we have done that, this gets revealed by itself. And since we have understood it, since we have seen it everywhere, since we see that it is the only thing that is responsible for everything, and seeing also that it is our own true nature, we are naturally attracted and drawn toward it spontaneously, and it reveals itself spontaneously from inside, not from outside. So this is some of the purport of the passages we're about to study. So let's have a look at this. So this is the fourth section of the Kena Upanishad. And we're talking about the instruction that has been given as an analogy, and that it is a meditative thing. Tasyaisha adesho yadetati yuto vyayut tada itin yamimashada iti aditevatam. That is, this instruction about what? About the meditative value of this, through what? Through a story, through an analogy. All analogies are inadequate. It is like that which is known, and another analogy is given, as the flash of lightning. In other words, he flashes faster than lightning. Now we have an expression. It came to me. It struck me. An idea comes, it struck me. An aha moment. Yes, that's it. So these aha moments, these lightning moments, they come from meditation. It occurs to me suddenly. we have all these talks and so on and so forth. And sometimes people say, oh, yes, I get it now. But it's the same thing I've been speaking for probably for years. But because of the subtlety of the subject, they don't actually, the penny doesn't drop necessarily. For this reason, the Upanishads give us a number of multiple choices in terms of approaches. And so lightning, the concept, the analogy of lightning is given, or a winking of an eye. Before I know it, it's there. And it is also, therefore, though, it's as if the eye winked. So these are illustrations in a divine context. Let's explore that subject a little bit. We take a lot of things for granted. And previously what I had said is, if we take the attention and steer it in a structured way, concentrated way, then it has a revealing capacity. But look at the things that divert our attention away. So we live with a body that sometimes is healthy and full of energy, and sometimes is creaking. That's the nature of the human body. And then there's our mind, a jumping thing that we have to deal with. And if we don't deal with it nicely, then we get all kinds of psychological difficulties. We get some pains. We get emotional ups and emotional downs. There's no stability for it. So dealing with this instrumentation, where should we steer our attention? We should steer our attention away from all the things that are disturbing this fundamental reality or our vision of it, and start observing things better. So you're familiar with my formula. My formula is oats, O-A-T, you can put an S on as well. In order to appreciate something and therefore have a love for it, we have to observe it correctly. We have to take all the things that we take for granted and get our aha moment by looking at it properly, where it reveals itself in its pristine nature. And anything that has an aesthetic value has a beauty underneath it. And why is there appeal toward it? An appeal toward it is because the fundamental thing that we are calling God, Brahman, etc., is our own fundamental self. Naturally, we are drawn toward it. And so that brings us to the next stanza then. It begins with Atat Yatman. So then is the instruction through analogy in the context of the individual self. This known fact that the mind seems to go to it naturally. The mind goes toward beauty naturally. When we see the evidence of this entity, the mind goes toward it naturally. The reason why we love things is because our intrinsic nature is that itself. So we are drawn to it, whether we know it or not. And it may be that it's drawn to things that we don't recognize. For example, simple joy is because our nature is that. And therefore we are drawn toward it. We are drawn toward perfection. This may manifest as rivalry in a workplace. Let me be successful at a job. There's an ideal that we hold, an ideal of perfection that we hold, and we are driven toward it. And this driving force, we can call it evolution. Evolution is not something that just happens. It's because there's some internal drive moving us toward it. We are attracted toward it. It's an attractor. And so we want pleasure. Why do we want pleasure? Because we mistake it. We have a surface value of it. We mistake it for this fundamental perfection, and the urge for perfection manifests in this way. We're just using the energy in a wrong direction, in a pain-bearing direction. We can take that and move it in a better direction. So it's a known fact, actually, that the mind seems to go toward it. It seems to go toward it. It's not obvious, but it seems to go toward it, the highest perfection, the highest values that we have. And the fact that it, that is Brahman, is repeatedly remembered through the mind. Always we're questioning, what is the meaning of life? How can we advance ourselves? How can we be better people? And then once we understand the principle of it, we constantly think of it. That constant remembrance itself is a technique. So we call it, see, Abhyasa Yoga. That is, we're constantly remembering, not forgetting. We're suffering from forgetfulness. Antidote is remembrance. So it's repeatedly remembered through the mind as also the thought that the mind has with regard to Brahman. So that's the learning about it, that this one Brahman, who is the supreme divine agent, not only flashes faster than the lightning in the wink of an eye, but even in the course of our normal, so-called normal events, it is because this entity, Brahman, is our own immortal self. And naturally, we proceed toward it, towards self-discovery. Self-discovery is a natural urge within us. And we may misunderstand it as, personality development or something like that, or advancement in learning, or advancement in culture, or whatever it is. But at the back of it is a movement toward our own nature. And the pure mind's will is to remember him and bow to him again and again. That means we come back to this pristine definition of what is God, the one worthy of offering to. Spontaneously, we can love it. So that is the fifth stanza. Then we go on. It begins, Tada Tadvanam. A name is given to this entity, Tadvanam. So that Brahman is well known as the one adorable to all creatures. All creatures. What? A cow? What? An insect? Yes, because the survival instinct being there, they also have a drive. They have a drive toward increasing and making things better. It may be a limited scope, but the internal drive for life is there. And so there is an immediate sense of love and adoration, and particularly when we contemplate what is behind everything. So the standard question I always ask, who digests your food? Last night we had some people here. It was a fundamental question I asked. Who digests your food? I asked it to a child. Now a child's answer may well be no different from an adult's answer. I digest my food. For what? You put something in this entrance here, you chew it, and then you follow it up with a spoon and you stir it? No, I don't think so. Something else is doing it. The capacity to digest food is there with every creature. At the human level, we have the capacity to deeply appreciate it and respond with love. Lord, you digest my food. Let me make the thing that goes in thoroughly digestible for you. Instead of stuffing something in indiscriminately into the mouth, some consideration has to be there. Lord, you are digesting my food. Let me put something in that is easy for you to digest, since you operate from a base of love. There's no reward for you to digest my food, for me and all creatures. The evidence of you is in the digestive capacity of all creatures. There's no reward for you to constantly pump my heart and invest life energy in me. There's no secondary motive for you to circulate the bloodstream and repair every cell and give me a framework called time so that I can put something useful in. If there was a God like that, we wouldn't hardly believe in that. So what is the evidence that God is lovable? As soon as we understand the grace that pours from it. Grace that pours in it in terms of capacity to digest food, to provide food. And it's not a simple matter. There's a whole complex arrangement. Sunshine is necessary, water is necessary, air is necessary, nutrients are necessary. The whole universe collaborates to give me some food. And then that food, the capacity to digest it and transform it into beautiful, beautiful cells of the body, all operating in a highly complex and organized way, if I leave it to its own devices. If I have faith in God, please do this for me. And faith that I'm not a useless person. Why? Because the highest entity who loves me has decided to invest his own life energy in me for a purpose, must be for some divine purpose. With that confidence, I can proceed in life. So this pouring aspect is evident everywhere if we notice it. Just as we can take for granted water, say beginning in a mountain somewhere and coming down and collecting and giving us life and providing life for animals to drink and gathering in momentum and become wider and wider and wider, supporting all kinds of species and ending up in the sea. And every drop of water, you see, the ocean doesn't mind about every drop of water. It's irrelevant. Every drop of water is part and parcel of the ocean. That understanding comes. Why should there be all these waves called life? To teach us that we are the ocean. And we can't avoid it. There's a thrust, a movement forward. God's grace is coming forward. So Paul's saying, I have full faith in this. Then what I can do is go off with just the clothing I have with me and see what happens. What happens is that source of life will sustain me. Some events will come. We can see that in the lives of monks who go and do this, or nuns who go and do this. In their wandering phase, they don't care what to eat, what to drink, everything gets provided. And they're quite confident that it will happen. By itself, it will happen. This is called faith. Faith that grace will be lovingly always supplied. There's one person who had a very good sense of humor, and he had a stage show, and he'd come out. Prior to his coming on the stage, he would puff a cigarette and keep it there. And when he arrived on the stage, he bowed and everything, and big applause. And then he'd open his mouth, and this smoke would come out. And he would say, I've had a very long day. You see, I'm a little short of breath because I've been breathing the whole day. You see, it's not us that do the breathing. We don't consciously say, let me inflate and deflate the lungs. So that Brahman is well known as the one adorable to all creatures. Spontaneously, when we understand it, then there's a sense of wonder, adoration, and thankfulness that comes. And so there's no struggle against it once we recognize it. It's to be meditated on with the help of the name, Tadduna. All creatures surely pray to anyone who meditates on it this way. So what is this Taddunam? It's derived from two roots. Tasya, that is, his, a person, and Varnam, adorable, the one who is adorable. We adore God not because any church says it, but we adore God because God is adorable. We love God because God is lovable. And then you see those who discover it make an astonishing statement that entity is love itself. All the theistic religions will declare God is love. And then when Jesus is asked, what is the supreme commandment? What is the supreme directive that we should use in spiritual life? Having given so many do's and don'ts and so on, he says it all boils down to one thing. You love the Lord your God. How should we do it? With everything you have, with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, everything. That is to take all the energy that you have and direct it in a divinized way. It means a thankful way. A thankful way that spontaneously makes one feel a sense of awe and wonder, adoration and thankfulness. Everywhere we can see it. We can see it more easily when we go and look at natural scenes that spontaneously delight the soul. Why should they delight the soul? Because we recognize our own inherent divinity in it. We seek God in it. We may not register it like that. You look at a beautiful mountain, beautiful stream. Oh, here I'm in Bantry. Around every corner, a beautiful scene, which the breath gets suspended. And delight around every corner. Why do people spend millions and millions to come to tourist spots? And this spot is one of them. It's because there's some aesthetic value in them that they recognize, something that makes them feel calm, something that elevates the soul. You just look at it. And on the road, specific spots where the car can go in, people get out and look out. To do what? What are you doing? What benefit do you get? No benefit. It's just to absorb the scene which is there. And the corresponding internal matching movement happens. Because that is our nature. We spontaneously move toward it. So all creatures surely pray also to anyone who meditates on it in this way, because you can't hide it. And know a Brahman or a recognizer of that, it'll shine through their very pores. And then it goes on. So the 7th stanza is there. So we say, Sir, says the text, speak of the secret knowledge. It seems an irrelevant question to ask. Speak of this secret knowledge again. So, as if the teacher hadn't said anything. So the commentators go through this. They try to understand, what does this question mean? Sir, speak of the secret knowledge. Upanishad means secret knowledge. It's also sacred knowledge. And then the teacher replies, I have told you of this Upanishad, this secret knowledge. I've imparted to you that very secret knowledge of Brahman. But why would a student doubt it? So the commentary says, after being instructed, the disciple said to the teacher, see, Bhuva sir, Bruhi, speak of that Upanishadam, that secret thing that is to be thought about. Now, if you read all the commentary and so on and so forth, I'll give you the summary of it. See, it's not that it hasn't been taught. It hasn't been internally grasped. Or maybe there's something additional that has been left out. Well, there's nothing additional. So the teacher gives that assurance. There's no additional information that you require. I've given you everything. But here's the piece that is missing. And it now comes in the next stanza. Purification of the mind is necessary. The principle is one thing, but you have to do something about it. You have to connect with it. And so it's in this way. So that secret knowledge, tapaha, that is concentration of the body, the senses, and the mind. What is tapasya? Literally, tapasya is heat caused by friction. Every time you change course and do something unusual, you're creating a resistance in the mind. Swami Vivekananda in his commentaries on Patanjali Yoga Sutras tells us that in dealing with psychic prana, that is that prana that manifests as the activity of the mind. You take on a new idea, then fortunately, the brain itself has a quality called neuroplasticity. You can make a new groove by repeating it time and again, making a new groove in the brain. He puts it like that. So we have to make new grooves everywhere, new approaches. I often tell people, I told it last night, I don't care if you agree with me or disagree with me. All the workshops I tell this. You can agree with me, disagree with me, it doesn't make any difference to me. No skin off my nose, so to speak. But at least think differently. Shift your position. You have the capacity to shift your position constantly. Look at things from a new direction. Make life more exciting and adventurous for yourself. The standard way of looking at things that produces a standard formula in dealing with life is not adequate. In fact, it provides you with a deficit, not an advancement. If you say, I'm all right, let me just carry on, the bulk of humanity does it. Live for day to day, eat, drink, sleep, and repeat it the following day. You'll get no advantage from it. But the disadvantage is you have no real structure for dealing with all the real difficulties of life. How will you manage them? Unless you shift your position and shift your attitudes and your approaches. Supposing instead of saying, I have a problem, or I have an obstacle, or I have a challenge, or any of these terms, supposing you view it differently. Supposing you have a sporting attitude. Instead of crashing into a wall, supposing you find a way around it and do it with a sense of delight. Why not? And you can only do that with this purity of mind, this clarity of mind. This is called tapasya. That is purifying body, mind, all components that make up the person. So we are told in the commentary that Shankaracharya gives us here, concentration, etc. That is concentration, cessation from sense objects. It doesn't mean you close your eyes. It means that you revalue the sense objects in such a way that you don't become attached to them. And then in meditation, you withdraw from them completely. Rights, etc. That is, all the rights normally deemed to be religious rights. We were talking earlier on. All this ritual I don't like. It's all right. Blessed are you. If it has no meaning for you, don't do it. Or if it is there to get some result, some motive. This is described in that portion of the Vedas, which is karma kanda. But these Upanishads come as jnana kanda, the knowledge portion. And so that's not to say don't do rites and rituals and all the rest of it, that's fine. But if you really want to understand this, then you have to you're faced with either giving up meaningless things or put some increased value, make them useful to you. Let's take a simple ritual, lighting a lamp. Don't forget, tapasya means friction. In order to light, to make a flame, a spark, you require friction. And the wonder about fire is how from two sticks you can make some spark. Something like a mystery. The fire being contained in the two sticks and just rubbing. And it's not easy to make fire. Anybody who does any bushcraft will understand. One of the most difficult things that requires great skill is easy once you repeat it. The wood must be dry, must be selected in a certain way. There must be a contrast between one hardness of wood and another, and there must be some kind of small tinder which is there, some dry straw or something of that nature. They catch a spark, and then that spark will go off unless you sustain it with blowing until you get a first blaze, and then you add to the blaze. Now you have a fire. And those who are not practiced on it will spend hours and hours with no results. So this is not an easy thing to do, but what a wonderful discovery fire was. It changed the whole of civilization, human civilization. So this is this tapasya that is necessary. You need to light in a flame. All of this can be thought of by striking a match. Striking a match and lighting a flame, lighting a lamp. But if you just do it mindlessly, what value does it have? You light a lamp, why you do it? My mother did it, her mother did it, etc. It has no meaning. You can put meaning into it. And this is the art of putting the meaning in every action that you do. Because we all are in a situation where we have to do certain actions. Certain obligatory actions have to be done: eating, drinking, evacuating, sleeping. All of that has to be done to sustain the human person. We may as well do it with a dedicated mind so that there's no division between spiritual life and secular life. The false division. It's not really a division at all. All life is sacred. All activities are sacred. If we take it in that way, then this is tapasya. This is concentration in all activities. And then, so the rites, etc., are its legs. They are the fundamental structure. All religious activities are a fundamental structure, including the Vedas, which are its limbs. And truth is its dwelling place, its abode. All of these we have to use. We have to use scripture. We have to use meaningful activity. All activity has to be meaningfully ritualistic. And concentration has to be there. And we value things in such a way that we are not obliged by the objects. We are not responding as slaves to objects around us. Then it goes on, and this is the last stanza here in the Kena Upanishad, that anyone who knows this, he having dispelled sin or weakness, remains firmly seated in the boundless, blissful, and highest Brahman. That one remains firmly seated there. It ends off, the whole Upanishad ends off on a highly elevated and positive note. So he who knows this thus, yova utamivam veda vahatya papmanam anante sargo loge jeye pratitishthati. Anyone who knows this thus, having dispelled sin, not just hearing about it, but reflecting on it and then tuning into it and really understand it. Worth reading the commentary here. So anyone who Vedayavam realizes thus, has spoken, this thing, this blessed knowledge of Brahman, which has already been spoken of from the very beginning, from the very first question, that is Kena, willed by whom? And that has been eulogized in the text, and that begins with the answer. It was Brahman indeed, and which is the foundation of all knowledge. All knowledge comes from it, higher knowledge and lower knowledge, notwithstanding the presentation of the fruit of the knowledge of Brahman because thereby one gets immortality. It is mentioned at the end of the way of a formal conclusion. See, such a knower, bhajata papmanam, dispelling sin. What is sin? Sin is the fact that we don't know it, and the behavior that comes as a result, shaking off the seed of mundane existence. The seed, because if the initial seed is the initial causal entity for all our actions and all our relationships with the world remains, we can't get out of it. this thing called samsara. Constituted by what? We take this world to be real, but actually we're looking at it through a screen of ignorance. And the ignorance produces desire and produces corresponding actions that sustains the status quo of ignorance. The person who remains firmly seated in this boundless world, or this boundless area, this in the environment, sacred environment that is Brahman, and that nature of Brahman is all bliss, being qualified by the word Ananta, boundless. The word Swarga does not mean heaven in this context. It means the whole environment of bliss. And so this finishes off, and the purport of this is that it does not again return to this world. You catch a one-way ticket, not a return ticket. And you get this final fulfillment, which we call immortality. Inherently, all of us are looking for immortality, to live forever. So we ignore the fact of death, this understanding that the human person is only this body-mind complex. If it goes, the whole thing goes. No, not at all. Let it go. Some entity is there. It never comes, never goes. It's not bound by space. Doesn't change in the framework of time. So that is the Kena Upanishad. And it's now 10 to 12. I was going to begin on a small briefing on the next Upanishad that we will study, the Kena Upanishad. But maybe I'll just pause there to see if there are any comments or questions that cover what we have done.
You can explain more about the sin that you were just now saying now.
So the question here is, can I explain more about this concept of sin? Sin is a very misunderstood term because some theologies will say our starting point is a sin that we have no input to or no control of. What is sin? Sin is an inherent attitude of weakness that comes from ignorance. The ignorance that we don't know. Opposite of ignorance is knowledge. We don't know our inherent divine nature. And because we don't know that, then we behave in egocentric ways, selfish ways. So anything like that will be a crime against ourselves. So we have to shift the theological understanding to really get to it and remove the guilt from it. See, Christian theology says that you never mind about you sinning. Actually, you began with an inherited sin, an inherited sinfulness, an original sin, says theology. But when you study from a psychological point of view, it's not a sin at all, it's a wound. There's an original wound that we have. And the original wound is inherited from this lack of understanding of the true nature of things. We're misdirected. So we don't start off from a point of weakness. If you say, I'm a sinner and sinner, I'm a sinner perpetually, you'll be a sinner. You're going to make an apology once. You don't have to keep apologizing. Some of your friends here, they come and apologize, say, good. And in 5 minutes, I require another apology. And for the rest of your life, every 5 minutes, please apologize. One apology should be enough. And move on. So now what is the Vedantic interpretation of the so-called original sin? We're all born under the ending of this veil of ignorance, veil of Maya, like a thick cloud presented before the sun and not shifting on. We learn to penetrate that. This is called knowledge. And of course, we accumulate all our merits and demerits. So there's a an inherent law of causation called sowing and reaping. Whatever we put in, not what somebody else puts in, what we put in, we have to get the result. If we order something online, we have to live with what comes. I ordered something online some months ago, and I thought it was a shoe rack. Anyway, it was a scam. Because something came through the post, some small metal ring. So, but you see, had I done it properly and understood properly, then I wouldn't have complained, oh, this thing came. No, I ordered something, it was a mistake, and now this came, so I live with it. Live it with it means we accept it, we draw the line, and use the next second to put something better. Put another order. Every thought put in every second is a fresh order to God sitting as a universe. Please provide me with this. And once the order is put in, we can't cancel it. We can put something better in, of course. So, all right. Monday I'll be returning to Dublin, and so we'll resume our Tuesday talks from Dublin, actually. So that's it. Anything else? So I'll talk a little bit about the Kena Upanishad. So it is seen to be one of the most profound Upanishads that there is. Pretty long, it will take us a long time. There's a correlation between it and the Bhagavad Gita. We find many passages in common. But it is beautifully presented as something that is quite easy to understand from the point of view that is presented as a story. And it's a very ancient story. It goes back to the Rig Veda. So we get some clue that it is those who heard it would have understood or recognized the basis of the story. And it starts off with somebody, a very clever turn of phrase or double meaning, that it starts off with somebody who has a great reputation, somebody who is successful and wants to sustain and increase their success. Actually, the best way to be successful is to mobilize the forces of nature. We all require food. To get food, we require rainfall. To get rainfall, you have to have dedicated people who are tuned into the cosmic supply that gets the rainfall. This is why in the Vedas, Indra was so prominent. Indra is that principle of providing rain and seasons and all the rest of it. And part of that is lightning. So he holds the thunderbolt. So this is Indra. But you see, Indra, these various manifestations and forces are not self-contained. Behind that is some other entity. And so when all of us, including these various other beings in different realms, misunderstand that the energy supply is our own, then we become egoistic and proud. And we were discussing what is sin. Sin, that's it. There's only really one difficulty, and that is egoism, selfishness. Everything else comes from it. But that in turn has come from this great thing, avidya, this ignorance about the status quo we have as purely divine, a pure spirit. All right, we'll pick that up next Saturday anyhow. All right, leave it at that. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.